Hey, listen, people and peopleettes. So the Game Awards just happened, and Zelda, of course, didn't get Game of the Year, but they did get the Game Award for Best Action Adventure Game, which I feel like maybe there's not a second, like a silver medal, but that's kind of what I feel like it is. Granted, of course, not everybody was in both categories. But anyways, and after the award ceremony, you may have heard that IGN had an interview with Aonuma and Fujibayashi, which is what I would like to discuss today. Specifically, the topic on what will be the future of The Legend of Zelda. I mean, we've had Tears of the Kingdom for over half a year, and honestly, a lot of us have been wondering what's next, especially since we got the news that actually seems to be legit that we wouldn't be receiving DLC. Now, of course, it's too early to know any deep details, and they're not going to share too much about the game, but we were able to get some things that we can kind of pick from here, even if they're not super concrete at this point, obviously, in the development cycle of whatever this next game will be. So let's first of all start with this part of the interview. And I'll be paraphrasing some of this, but when asked about how they feel about some of the Zelda fans saying that they want more of a traditional linear Zelda of the past, Aonuma had to say this: "Well, I do think we as people have a tendency to want the thing that we don't currently have. And there's a bit of a grass is greener mentality. But I also think that with the freedom players have in the more recent games in the series, there still is a set path. It just happens to be the path that they choose. So I think that is one thing I kind of like to remind myself about the current games that we're making." First of all, I just want to say, outside of Zelda, I kind of think people do want this, like, I want this because I don't have it kind of thing. Didn't know Aonuma was trying to be my therapist on the side. I need it! But anyway, he talks about us creating our own path. First of all, I know that in Breath of the Wild, for me, with the several playthroughs that I've had, yes, I've changed the order of the Divine Beast that I've went in. I went in Valruta first. I think that I ended up going to Meadow later first. And, I've switched up here and there. But not only that part have I switched up. I've also switched up in what order I get the Master Sword. One time I didn't get the Master Sword till after all the Divine Beasts. The other time that I got it before all the Divine Beasts. I mean, if you want to, you can go get every single shrine and get the Spirit Orbs. And then go to the Blessings with only 3 hearts. And then just walk away with 20. How you do things is your own path, and you set it as you play the game, or maybe you set it before you even get into the game and before you start a new file, but it's your choice. And so I understand that that's what he's meaning by this path, but obviously what a lot of people want is not to set their own path, but for the game to kind of set it for them. Restrict me to this area. That area opens up a little bit more after I complete tasks here, then a little bit more, and continues to expand the world. And Aonuma actually addresses this specifically kind of in a couple of different places. The second part of his previous statement says, "But also, it's interesting when I hear people say those things because I'm wondering, why do you want to go back to a type of game where you're more limited or more restricted in the types of things or ways you can play? But I do understand that desire that we have for nostalgia, and so I can also understand it from that aspect." And actually, in a previous portion of the interview, he also says this following Fujibayashi: "So I am in complete agreement with what Mr. Fujibayashi said in that games where you need to follow a specific set of steps or complete tasks in a very set order are kind of the games of the past. Whereas currently the games of today are ones in which that can accept a player's own decisions and give them the freedom to flexibly proceed through the game, and the game will allow for that. So I'm in complete agreement with that as our design philosophy, but as the producer, I do have to admit making games that way always carries with it additional development cost, and that is something I have to think about." So to Aonuma, going back to a completely linear game feels like a restriction and also a developmental step backwards. I mean, they are a business, they're going to try to compete with other games. So to him, when it comes to creating games, he wants to be able to compete with other competitors, and going to more of a linear game feels like a game of the past to him. But he also does just feel like he's taking some of the freedom away from the characters. Now, with him making these points, I think it's safe to say that we probably won't be returning to a full linear story. At least not anytime soon. But I do think that there is hope that we could have kind of a mix of the two. I don't think we have to necessarily have one or the other. I mean, Tears of the Kingdom, I feel like, has a small example of this. Spoiler alert here, by the way. You can, of course, once you complete the tutorial, go to any of the 4 sages once you talk to Pyrrha at Lookout Landing. But there's a 5th sage that you cannot access until you actually complete the other 4. That's kind of how the 5th one's even brought up. Now, I think the Zelda team could expand upon that. Perhaps you could reach the whole world right after the tutorial point, but you need to save Goron City and Gerudo Town before Zora's Domain even comes under attack or is faced with whatever challenge that game has set for Zora's Domain. Now, of course, I'm just a dude sitting here behind my computer popping off ideas, but obviously the Zelda team can come up with even better ones that kind of mix the ideas together. Now, if Aonuma has already crushed your dreams already, well, don't get the cart ahead of the horse here. We got some other stuff to talk about. We got some more interview to go, because Aonuma also addresses the dungeons. The interviewer speaks about how Tears of the Kingdom's dungeon design was a little bit more intricate than the Breath of the Wild dungeons. It mentions that there's sort of a hunger for those classic dungeons like the Water Temple from Ocarina of Time. Aonuma's response was, that was kind of our intention with Tears of the Kingdom, as you mentioned, which was to put a bit more density or thoughtfulness into the design of the dungeons in the game. I mean, when we think of Breath of the Wild, one of our guiding principles was to rethink the conventions of the series, and that applied to our thinking about dungeons as well. So we kind of broke apart our previous assumptions about the way we've made dungeons so far with the game. And I think the result was simpler approach that you saw in dungeons in that game. But then we did hear the desire from fans for a bit more of a designed dungeon, and that led to our approach to dungeons for Tears of the Kingdom. And so as we proceed, whenever we're making a game, we look back at our past and then consider where we are now with the freedom that we give to the player in those games. So first of all, I think one of the cool points to take away from this, and we're reminded of this every once in a while, the Zelda team does listen to us nerds and what we have to say. And I definitely felt that in my first playthrough. Now that doesn't mean that I feel like Tears of the Kingdom's dungeons were perfect by any means, but I could feel in my first playthrough and in my first dungeon that they had moved back towards that traditional direction, even if it was still a little bit shy of what we all really want. And though it's important to pay attention to the fact that they did listen to us here, I think it's also important to note that almost everyone, even people who enjoyed Breath of the Wild, had the same comment. We want better dungeons, more classic dungeons, in-depth dungeons. That's kind of was the theme. I mean, there's not that many Divine Beast fangirls out there, you know? But obviously the Zelda team looks at how much of the fan base is wanting a specific thing and also how it would affect the next game before they actually fill any requests by us fans. And so I think that's really cool. I mean, I think fans should still express how they feel. I think that we should all give our opinion because it could literally make a change in the game. However, Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom have been praised for their open worlds and the freedom that you get in the games. I think it would take a lot for them to completely remove themselves from that and go back to a completely linear story. But because there is such a push from the fan base to get kind of that linearity back, I do kind of think that we could get a hybrid of the games. And lastly, but certainly not least, I want to talk about the possibility of playing Zelda in the future. The interviewer actually brings up the teaser trailer, talking about how it made a lot of us feel like Zelda could be playable, and goes on to ask what they think of Zelda fans wanting Zelda to have a bigger role and even to be playable. To which Aonuma says, yeah, it is interesting when you think about the name of the series, The Legend of Zelda, but Link is always the main character. I think that's important to pay attention to. Zelda has always been involved, and they have a relationship and their own rules in each of the games. But it is true that I think there's always room for thinking about this type of thing and Zelda's role. And there may be some sort of possibility for something like that in the future. So first of all, I think it's very interesting that he says Link is always the main character. Now, he could be just addressing the fact that Link has always been the main character. Maybe he's not saying that we won't deviate from that, but is he saying that if Zelda's the only playable person in the game, would it really be the Legend of Zelda game? Or would he want to make that a complete spin-off, which, what would you call it? The Legend of Link? But I found that part specifically interesting. But of course, if Aonuma has any plans to make Zelda playable, they like to be like Sheik and keep their secrets, you know, so he didn't give too much away. But it's cool to know that it could happen in the future. I remember, kind of like the interviewer said myself, wondering if Zelda would be playable after we seen that teaser trailer in 2019. And perhaps the truth is, Zelda was meant to be playable and they kind of just changed it as the game went on and went through development. I mean, this game was in development for a while and they just made changes as they went along. I don't know, maybe if us fans requested enough, we'll get it. So yeah, when it comes to Zelda's future, I think we can kind of expect for the games to continue along a similar path to Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, but I don't think that doesn't mean that we shouldn't share our opinions and get those out there because they obviously have an effect on things. And let's just keep hoping that we get a playable Zelda. We'll pray to the goddesses for that one. But I have some other things that I kind of want to dissect from this interview, and maybe I'll be making some videos about those in the upcoming weeks. And if you want to hear those, subscribe so you don't miss it. Also, hit that like, hit the share, and let me know down in the comment section below if you could bring back anything or anyone from any older Zelda what would it be? Or whom? But thank you guys, and if you want to hear about the games that I think could be getting remakes, check out this video right here.